Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. The topic for today's discussion, as you can see on your screen, is going to be breathing and exchange of gases. This shall be the second part of this particular chapter. I hope you have seen the first one. Now, in this part, the first topic that we are going to discuss is regarding respiratory volumes and capacities. Before knowing as to what is volume, what is capacity, and what are the different names of the capacities and the volume that we need to remember, first of all we need to know regarding the instrument which is used to measure this volume, and this is known as spirometer. The image that you can see on the right one, it is nothing else but the image of a spirometer. Basically what happens here is that you have a mouthpiece. These are not required in this detail, that is why I am not writing all those things, but I am explaining to you. This is a mouthpiece. You need to pinch it with your teeth and then blow. You either need to blow or you need to inhale, and according to the amount of air that you are inhaling, this particular inner cylinder that you can see here, it will move, and based on that, whatever the readings, these are graduated here. So whatever the readings you will get, that shall be the reading that you are getting. Now that may be for inspiratory capacity, that might be for expiratory capacity, and all those things. That is not required as to how it is done, but just to make you remember the fact that the instrument which is used to measure the volumes and capacities is known as spirometer. I have added this diagram. Going ahead, what is the difference between volumes and capacities? Let us discuss this thing at the onset of the topic. So basically, capacity, it is nothing else but combination of volumes. See, tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, this is a pure volume. You don't have any capacity over there. But when you combine those volumes, suppose you are combining, say, tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume, whatever forms, that is known as inspiratory capacity, of course, whatever forms, that is the capacity. So capacity is nothing else but combination of volumes. So all volumes can form capacities, but not all capacities are volumes. So we are going to study this in a very non-conventional approach, of course. So ever since the start of this particular class, what you have been doing is known as tidal volume. Now I am telling you it like this because it leads to a visual memory in your brain that tidal volume is the first one that we start with in the volumes. And as I have told you since the start of the class, you are doing this. Hopefully this will strike you in your exam and you can remember that tidal volume is nothing else but the normal inspiration or expiration, whatever you do, that is known as the tidal volume. So it is normal, inspiration or expiration. Now just remembering that what is tidal volume won't do. Unfortunately, you have to remember this particular number also. Normal tidal volume, it is about 500 ml. If you remember from your previous class that I had told you that the normal breathing rate is approximately 12 to 16 breaths per minute. So the amount of air that can be inspired or expired by a particular person is 500 multiplied by 12 to 16, which comes out to be approximately 6,000 to 8,000 ml. So 6,000 to 8,000 ml per minute, and 500 ml is the normal volume of air inspired or expired. Next comes the inspiratory reserve volume. IRV refers to inspiratory reserve volume. Now you will remember this term by dissecting the term itself. Inspiratory refers to inspiration, reserve. Now see, whatever you had done normally, that comes under the tidal volume. So keeping the tidal volume aside, after normal inspiration, whatever is the additional volume of air that can be inspired, of course forcibly, otherwise normally you would just breathe your tidal volume and then the same volume you would expire and that would be done. But whatever the additional volume after subtracting the tidal volume or keeping the tidal volume aside that you can forcibly inspire, that is known as inspiratory reserve volume. I hope you remember this. Inspiratory refers to inspiration. Reserve means after you have done the normal one, that is the reserve one. In bikes, as you know, there is something called reserve. When the fuel tank of the bike is in the lesser side, that is how you can remember this, that whatever the normal fuel was there, we have used it, and whatever the volume is left, that is the reserve volume. Here, whatever the extra volume of air that you can inspire, that is known as inspiratory reserve volume. What is the normal inspiratory reserve volume in an individual, in a normal human being? That comes out to be approximately 2500 to 3000 ml. These are very confusing numbers, but I can't help you. You have to remember this. Going ahead, if there is something called inspiratory reserve volume, then expiratory reserve volume is bound to be present. Just again, we are dissecting the term. Expiratory means expiration. Reserve means keeping aside the normal. So keeping aside the normal means subtracting the tidal volume. Whatever the volume that is left, that is known as the expiratory reserve volume. Now, logic says that if the inspiratory reserve volume is 2500 to 3000 ml, then that should be the expiratory reserve volume also. But this is how nature have produced you. The expiratory reserve volume is not 2500 to 3000 ml. It is approximately 1000 to 1100 ml. This is about 3 volumes. Then next comes the residual volume. We can complete the residual volume in this page itself so that we can have the capacity in a different one. So after you have expired both your tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume, means you have passed out the normal tidal volume also, you have passed out the expiratory reserve volume also. Whatever the amount of air remains in the lung, that is known as residual volume. Residual volume refers to RV. So here the term is again self-explanatory. Whatever the volume is left, that is known as residual volume. Now what is what is the amount of residual volume? That is 1100 to 1200 ml. Now hopefully you don't need to study these particular volumes again. I have already told you how to remember that. Going ahead to the capacities now. After completing volume, remembering the capacities become a bit easier. So going up to something called IC. IC refers to inspiratory capacity. Now what is inspiratory capacity? Whatever the volume of air that you can inspire after normal expiration, that is known as inspiratory capacity. So you have taken up your tidal volume, along with that whatever the extra volume of air that you can take forcibly, this together forms your inspiratory capacity. So I am writing it as tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. Now if you add the two volumes here, the tidal volume, as you know, is 500 ml and the inspiratory reserve volume is 2500 to 3000 ml. So as a result of that, the inspiratory capacity that would come out to be, that will be approximately 3000 to 3500 ml. Going ahead to the next capacity that you need to remember, if there is something called inspiratory capacity, definitely expiratory capacity is bound to be present. Now what is expiratory capacity? Again, whatever the volume of air that you can expire after normal inspiration, that means after taking a normal tidal volume, whatever the volume of air that you can expire, that would consist of the tidal volume and the forceful expiration that you can do after that, that comes out to be tidal volume plus the expiratory reserve volume. Again, if you combine these two volumes, the 500 ml and 1000 to 1100 ml, the normal volume that would come out is 1500 to 1600 ml. This is about expiratory capacity. The next volume that you need to remember is the FRC, functional residual capacity. Now what does this particular term mean is that, see, residual volume, you know, whatever the volume is left in the lung after forceful expiration, that is residual capacity. But functional residual capacity means that without forcibly expiring, whatever the air is left, that is the functional residual capacity. It is basically a residual volume plus the expiratory reserve volume. So that would come out to be residual volume plus the expiratory reserve volume. Expiratory reserve volume, you know, it is 1000 to 1100 ml, and the residual volume is again 1100 to 1200 ml. So the amount of the normal functional residual capacity would come out to be something in the range of 2100 to 2300 ml. The next capacity is the vital capacity. Now, vital capacity refers to the maximum amount of volume that you can blow from your lungs. Now, this might sound a little crazy to you. So take a deep breath as long as you can, and then keep on expiring until you can't expire more. Whatever the volume that you have expired, that is the vital capacity. So it is going to be tidal volume plus the inspiratory reserve volume plus the expiratory reserve volume. The last one is the total lung capacity. TLC refers to total lung capacity. So what is total lung capacity is that whatever the volume that you just expired, that you just blew out from your lungs until you could not blow anymore, plus the number of plus the amount of air in the lungs which always remain, how hard you may try to blow it out, that is nothing else but the residual volume which remains in your lungs. So residual volume plus the vital capacity gives you the total lung capacity, or you can also say that it is going to be consisting of residual volume plus the expiratory reserve volume plus the tidal volume and the inspiratory reserve volume. So this is it for the capacities and the volumes that you need to remember. You can have this slide here. As you can see, tidal volume is the normal amount of air that is inhaled or exhaled, that is approximately 500 ml. Inspiratory reserve volume is the extra amount of air that can be inhaled forcibly, that is 2500 to 3000 ml. Similarly, the expiratory reserve volume is the extra air that can be exhaled forcibly, it is 1000 to 1100 ml. Again, the residual volume is the air which is remaining after forceful expiration or exhalation, that is 1100 to 1200 ml. Going to the capacities now. Capacities basically means the combination of volumes, as I have already told you. Inspiratory capacity is the volume that you can inspire after normal expiration, that comes out to be tidal volume plus the inspiratory reserve volume. Expiratory capacity is the vice versa, tidal volume plus the extra amount of air that can be forcibly expired. Functional residual capacity, as I have already told you, it is going to be the expiratory reserve volume plus the residual volume. Vital capacity is the amount of air that you blew out with all your might and whatever you could, that is the functional, that is the vital capacity. The inspiratory reserve volume, the tidal volume and the expiratory reserve volume. And total lung capacity is the one which consists of your vital capacity and the residual volume, or residual volume plus these three. So vital capacity is the maximum air that can be expelled after a deep inspiration. Basically what I made you to do, take a deep inspiration and then blow out as hard as you can. The next topic that we are going to discuss is the exchange of gases. Exchange of gases. Before discussing regarding the membrane which is responsible, or which is the filtration type of membrane for diffusion of gases, let's just discuss as to where does exchange of gases actually occur in our body. So there are basically two places where exchange of gases occur. The first one is the alveoli, and the other one is the body tissues. In the NCERT, there is a very deadly table which gives you the partial pressure of the gases at different places. Hopefully they never end up asking the values from there. In my preparation days, I never remembered that table, but it's good if you have a look there. So in alveoli, consider the alveoli, the inspired air in the alveoli. Their partial pressure of oxygen basically refers to the individual pressure of that particular gas in that particular mixture of air. So in alveoli, the gradient which arises or gradient which remains is for oxygen, of course. Here we are discussing for oxygen currently. We will subsequently discuss regarding carbon dioxide. In alveoli, the gradient for diffusion of oxygen, the partial pressure of oxygen, it diffuses from the alveoli, to the blood capillaries present around the alveoli. We will have a detailed discussion as to how it looks and what happens. So the oxygen diffuses, not partial pressure oxygen, the oxygen diffuses from the alveoli to the blood. In the body tissues, as you know, body tissues would use up oxygen and then they will undergo respiration to produce carbon dioxide. So here also oxygen will diffuse from the blood to the body tissues, cells, whatever you want to say. So it diffuses from the blood to the cells. Now for carbon dioxide, the story is completely vice versa. In the alveoli, the amount of carbon dioxide in the deoxygenated blood brought by the pulmonary artery is going to be higher. So the diffusion occurs from the blood to the alveoli, and then from the alveoli it will be expired out into the environment. And for body tissues, what would happen is that since the amount of carbon dioxide would be higher in the body cells due to respiration, so the gradient will be from the cells to the blood. Let's just have a little pictorial representation of this. Now consider this to be your heart, a very primitive one I have drawn. In the upper part you will have the interatrial septum, in the lower part you will have the interventricular septum. If you remember, these are the two structures which are muscular. Then you will have the atrioventricular septum in both the parts, so they are fibrous. So this is the right atria, this is the right ventricle, sorry, this is the left atria, and this is the right ventricle, and this one is the left ventricle. Consider two structures or two things, this to be your alveoli, and suppose these are cells present in your body. This diagram I am trying to pictorially represent what is given in the NCERT. So blood from the left ventricle via the aorta would come here, and then from aorta the arteries, the arterioles, all those things would arise. So this is the aorta which will bring blood to your body tissues. Now these body tissues are high up or having higher concentration of carbon dioxide, whereas the blood is having higher concentration of oxygen here. So oxygen would move from the blood to the cells, whereas carbon dioxide, let me use a different color, carbon dioxide would move from the body cells to the blood. Once this occurs, you know that we depict deoxygenated blood with blue in color. This will go to the right atria by the inferior and the superior vena cava. If you remember, this will go to the right atrium. From the right atrium to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, what would arise is known as the pulmonary artery. Well, pulmonary artery is the only artery which carries deoxygenated blood. These things you should know. So this is the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery would carry the deoxygenated blood. Here again, the concentration of carbon dioxide in blood is higher this time rather than the alveoli, and since the alveoli is having the inspired air, so amount of carbon dioxide is less there. As a result, carbon dioxide would flow from the blood to the alveoli, and oxygen, of course, oxygen would be higher in the alveoli, that would flow to the blood. As a result of that, blood would get oxygenated and that would come back to the left atria with the help of the pulmonary veins. This is basically in a very minimalistic way to say, this is basically the double circulation that we also discussed when we were discussing regarding circulatory system. Now we need to understand this particular part in a bit more detail. So let's have a discussion regarding that. Consider this to be your alveolus. Now, this alveoli is made up of a single layer of squamous epithelium. So the entire alveoli would consist of the single layer of squamous epithelium. What is squamous epithelium and what is epithelium? What are the other forms of epithelium we have discussed when we were discussing the chapter of structural organization in animals. So this is the single layer of squamous epithelium which is present in the alveoli. Now all of you know that epithelium rests on something called basement membrane. So whatever is present which is supporting this structure is nothing else, basically the basement membrane. Around this alveoli, what we will have is a network of capillaries. So I will subsequently draw that, and this is the squamous epithelium. Squamous epithelium which is single layered. Now consider your pulmonary artery. That pulmonary artery came and it passed very in close proximity to the alveoli. Now this pulmonary artery is going to have a epithelium of its own, and since this epithelium is lying towards the inner side, that is why this is known as endothelium. These things you remember from the cut section of the vein and arteries that we had discussed earlier in the chapter of body fluids and circulation. So this consists of your endothelium, and this particular endothelium is again resting on the basement membrane of the pulmonary artery and then the pulmonary vein, of course. So from this side, deoxygenated blood would come. In the alveoli, there will be exchange of gases. Carbon dioxide would flow from the blood to the alveoli, and oxygenated blood would flow from the alveoli to the blood. And whatever blood you would be having over here after gaseous exchange, that is going to be oxygenated one. Now this particular diagram, let's have a look at what is given in the NCERT. As you can see in this slide, this is the alveoli that I had drawn. This alveoli consists of a single layer of squamous epithelium. So that is a single layer. Then that definitely rests in the basement membrane or the basement substance that is mentioned here. Then comes the endothelium of the blood capillaries. They in turn are resting on the basement membrane. So whatever blood was coming through this pulmonary artery that became oxygenated here flowed through the pulmonary veins into your left atrium and the left ventricle and the rest of the body. So this particular three things that we read over here, a single layer of squamous epithelium, then the endothelium and the basement membrane, that forms a structure which is known as the diffusion membrane. So diffusion membrane consists of three things, or you can say three structures. Those three structures are the squamous epithelium of the alveoli, and in between the epithelium and endothelium what you had was the basement membrane. Basement membrane is written as BM, and at last you had the endothelium. This endothelium was of the blood capillary. So this is a very important membrane to remember, the diffusion membrane. So we have already read as to what are the places where exchange of gases occur. One important thing, an important line which is mentioned in the NCERT and you need to remember is that the solubility of carbon dioxide is about 20 to 25 times higher than oxygen. So this is solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times that of oxygen. So this is an important number that you should remember for your exams. Due to this, basically what happens is that even with a difference in the gradient of carbon dioxide being less in the alveoli or in the body cells, the carbon dioxide can be easily diffused. Since carbon dioxide is dangerous for us, so that is why we have evolved in such a way that even if we have a little less of a difference in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide between, say, the blood and the body cells, the carbon dioxide will be flushed out from the body cells to the blood. This, in case of oxygen, is a bit less because we need oxygen for survival. So as you can see in the slide, there are two places where gaseous exchange occur. One is between the alveoli and the blood. The other one is between the blood and the tissues. Definitely principle is the diffusion. Diffusion means that gas would flow from higher concentration to lower concentration. We have seen in this slide as to what happens with oxygen and what happens with carbon dioxide. So this is occurring due to diffusion. Gases move from higher concentration to lower concentration or lower partial pressure. Partial pressure, as I have told you, the individual pressure of the gases in the mixture is known as partial pressure. Now this is a part of the deadly table in the NCERT that I was talking about. I don't think that you can remember the individual values. It is not humanly possible to do that. But what I would like you to learn or remember is to as which gas is higher in which place. So in alveoli, this is the one which is in direct contact with the environment, so partial pressure of oxygen is bound to be more than partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Next comes the deoxygenated blood. In deoxygenated blood, again, since it is known as deoxygenated because the amount of carbon dioxide is higher, so partial pressure of oxygen is less compared to partial pressure of carbon dioxide in deoxygenated blood. In case of oxygenated blood, again, it is known as oxygenated blood because the partial pressure of oxygen is higher compared to carbon dioxide. In the tissues, again, we know that tissues undergo respiration, they produce carbon dioxide while oxidation of food. So the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is higher in the tissues. That is it. Oxygen diffuses from the alveoli to the blood and then to the tissues. Carbon dioxide, just to the opposite one, it will diffuse from the tissues to the blood and then to the alveoli. So that is it for this part of the video. Thank you for listening to me patiently. If you appreciate my work, kindly consider subscribing to the channel. This is definitely free for you, but it gives me a great motivation to form or to make such more videos. So thank you. I will see you in a different video with the next part of this particular chapter.